Welcome everyone to today's edition of One Single Story. We are on day 95. It's April the 5th, and today we're going to look at Judges 17. So this was almost a text that I wanted to select for us to preach from because as I read through, because I'm reading ahead, I put a star by something in my notes. You can see the star beside the note I'd made because this passage is intriguing to me.
Strange.
For multiple reasons. So let me read a little bit of it. It says, there was a man named Micah who lived in the hill country of Ephraim. One day he said to his mother, I heard you place a curse on the person who stole 1,100 pieces of silver from you. Well, I have the money. I was the one who took it. The Lord bless you for admitting it, his mother replied. He returned the money to her, and she said, I now dedicate these silver coins to the Lord. In honor of my son, I will have an image carved and an idol cast. So there's just in those three verses, there's a lot to unpack, and we're going to try to talk about them as much as we can. But he stole money from his mother.
Yeah.
And because when I put myself in the story, there are lots of questions I ask. You know, why would he steal money from his mother? Was it something she was doing? Was it something he was doing? Did he have a habit? Was she stingy? You know, I don't know. Those are the questions I ask. What does it say about either of them, the mother or the son, that he would steal money from her?
It makes you wonder about the relationship and the trust. I mean, I'm thinking even 1,100 pieces of silver is a significant amount of money. It appears as you read through this story that there's not a father figure in there, and for her to have these kinds of resources, and I don't know if 1,100 was excess and she still had significant amounts of resources, or if this represented the bulk of what she had to live on. But there obviously are some dynamics going on that we're not given privy to. You know, for him to get in a situation where he makes the decision to steal from his mother.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts, Cheryl?
I mean, in my opinion, you have to be pretty low down to steal from your parents. But what's interesting is it doesn't infer that he spent any of the money either.
Well,
I think that's
yeah. So there are a couple of things here that I'm trying to decipher out of who she is. You know, so we would have read about Balaam being a diviner of the spirits, you know, but he still hears from God, you know, and there's almost this duplicitous form of worship that comes from this woman. Good, clean water and bad water comes out of our mouth. We'll see that in just a minute. But he apparently was fine to keep the money until he heard her place a curse on the person who gets it.
Yeah.
And the wording here, place a curse, it doesn't say she prayed to God. It's almost like she is operating in some kind of medium. I don't know.
Yeah, it does appear to me, at least, that he is more concerned about the curse
than he is his mom.
Than he is about the mom, or
doing the right thing.
Or doing the right thing. That the motivation is, I don't want this on me. I don't mind stealing the money, but I don't want this curse that I heard you placing on ever who it was, because you didn't know at the time who it was.
And isn't, in theory, whether it's right or wrong, but in theory, isn't why we put things like prison or the death penalty in place is to be a deterrent. It's not because we want them to go to jail, because the Reformation doesn't seem to work. We're trying to keep them from.
Yes.
You know, we're trying to get them to do the right thing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And here the curse is what turned him. You know, so he says, "I was the one who took it." Almost. I mean, when I read this, it's so nonchalant.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't say he fell on the ground,
That's
fell on
right.
his
Wept,
face,
cried,
yeah, nothing. There's almost there's no emotion. I just don't want the curse. I was the one who stole it here.
Take it back.
Yeah. And she says, the Lord bless you for admitting it. Like, thank you, Jesus. I'm glad. I don't know if she was glad it was him and it hadn't gone too far.
Right, yeah, because there's a lot of ways to interpret this. It could have been the mere fact, once she's so relieved to get the money back.
Right.
You know, that she's like, well, at least you came clean with it, and I appreciate that. And, you know, so that's the good part, which it was a good factor. If someone else has stolen it, she's probably never going to see the money again. So,
But then why would you go take part of that sum and have like this idol?
Yeah, so
Cast out? I mean, even just the fact that she took such a large portion of it is just so odd. It's like she's celebrating, what happened.
And there's an interesting verse in here where she says, "I now dedicate these silver coins to the Lord," which would imply there had been zero commitment, dedication, gratitude, thankfulness, or even acknowledge how or why she got it. And the fact that she had this huge financial loss, and now she's recouped it. She's saying, okay, well, I need now to dedicate this to the Lord. I need to acknowledge Him that. And so the gratitude only came after what she thought she had lost and had now recovered, rather than it had been a thankfulness or offer to the Lord on the front side.
Yeah, so in this, there are lots of things you can read into this passage, but one of the things that I see is there's clearly limited spiritual leadership going on, not just for her, but in general in this area.
Yeah.
They're kind of trying to sort things out themselves.
We'll see that.
Because out of her mouth, she says two completely different things at the same time. What you just said, she says, "I now dedicate these silver coins to the Lord." Hard right turn, almost 180 degrees. In honor of my son, I will have an image carved and an idol cast.
Yeah.
So her response is, "Thank the Lord, let me make an idol."
Mm-hmm.
Those don't seem to go together.
Yeah.
It is almost this convoluted spirituality that I'm struggling with, and it reminds me, for me. So this, I think, is probably why this passage jumped off the page. Is I see this is where we are living today. Mm-hmm. I thank the Lord, but I've got my idols.
Yes.
I worship Him with my mouth, but I don't worship Him with my life. We think we're spiritual, but we're not spiritual. We have meshed unspiritual things with spiritual things, whether it's politics or health or just the list could go on music. We've merged what was spiritual in with things that aren't spiritual, and we're trying to make both things happen at the same time. Yeah. I don't know.
I agree. I think that's a really good analogy of what's happening in our culture today. That we get a really good glimpse of that here, the merging of the two.
Yeah, the people can't tell. This is what I struggle with as a pastor, is when the people can't tell whether we're talking about spiritual things or political things. Whether we can't tell whether we're talking about spiritual God or we're talking about culture. Which two is it? And it doesn't mean one doesn't affect the other. It just means the lines get blurred so much that it's unhealthy.
Yep.
Don't you wonder too? I mean, I think that on that same note, when a stranger meets you, do they know that you're a Christian?
Yeah.
Or do you just seem like everybody else?
Because it's so blurred.
Right.
Yeah, well, I think we get much more insight into people's lives today than we used to. There's passages that talk about, fresh water and salt water can't flow out of the same place, or it's fresh or it's clean. It's not the two. But with social media, you can watch people 1 minute, talking about how much they love Jesus, and you need to love your neighbor, and the next day they're trashing their neighbor.
Yeah.
And I think the world goes, who are these people? Do they love Jesus or do they not love Jesus? Who are they? So then he goes on. So the convolution of spirituality continues. It says, so she took 200 silver coins, gave them to a silversmith, made them to an image, an idol, and these were placed in Micah's house. Micah set up a shrine for the idol. He made a sacred ephod and some household idols. Then he installed one of his sons as his personal priest. Like, you're going to be my personal priest. What are some of the dangers? Because when I read this, the thing that over and over again plays in my mind is there's this absence of an overarching spiritual influence in the nation. So he doesn't know what to do. He's doing the best he knows how to do. That's how I see it. I just want to be spiritual. What do I do? What are some of the dangers of there not being some clear boundaries, guidelines, influence? You know, we can knock the Roman Catholic Church, and they have plenty of places that need addressing. But one of the things they try to do is have influence over as big a, you know. So this is how you do it. This is kind of the formula that you use, you know, if that's the right way to say it. And what happens when it's a free for all? You get to worship ever how you choose.
Well, the result is what we see in verse 6 there, where all people did whatever seemed right in their own eyes. That people make their own choices, own decisions.
They state it multiple times.
Yep. And just go their own way, do their own thing. And, you know, it's one of the things that the, quote, church in this culture will get pushed back from is when the church defines biblical standards. That are very clearly laid out, that oftentimes people will push back on that and say, well, that's legalistic, or you're trying to dictate and dominate how I live, and even have too much influence in the culture. But that's a large part of the reason God gave us this word. And the reason why we're going through it every day is so that we understand the parameters and boundaries He's laid out, so that we can live within them. Now, within those boundaries, there's a lot of place for discussion and interpretation, you know, and you see it this way and that way. But there are certain boundaries and parameters that need to be held closely to, and it is the church's responsibility, our responsibility, to make sure people understand those and know what they are. I don't think it's our job to have a whip and to drive them to that, or to condemn them when they're beyond that, but it's part of our responsibility to help clearly define that, so you don't have this, what he's talking about here, where it's just chaotic and everybody's just doing their own thing because they don't know.
Go ahead.
I think this is a good example of what had happened after time had gone by, when God had said, you have to drive all of these people out. And it seemed horrific, but He knew how it would infiltrate their culture. And so here it still stands that there's idols, they're mixed up about what is worshiping God, what's not, because they have, you know, become part of another culture. Lots of other cultures who have brought in all of their ideas about how to worship and what to worship, and it seems like they're at the point where they don't know.
Yeah.
They don't know anymore.
And it's
Not unlike where we are today in a lot of ways.
Yeah, well, I hear parents say, or people say, you know, I want my kids to choose for themselves. And so they don't try to influence them in a spiritual way. But I think there's some real dangers of spiritual ignorance.
Absolutely.
And we're seeing some of that play out in our world today. Whether you call it legalism or not, I think that having some framework, some guidance for this is what following God looks like. This is what worship looks like. So what are some, well, there's so much I could talk about here. I don't know why this is one of my favorite passages of anything we've done so far, but mainly because it's
intriguing.
Strange. You know, it's unusual. But it says, this Levite comes along, and Micah sees him, asks him where he's from. He says, I'm a Levite from Bethlehem in Judah, and I'm looking for a place to live. Stay here with me, Micah said, and you can be a father and a priest to me. I will give you 10 pieces of silver a year. Well, he could have kept him around for a long time with what he stole from his mom.
He had about 10 years worth of salary already.
10 a year. He had
100 years.
Yeah, he had 110 years.
He had lifetime.
That's right.
He had lifetime.
He could have kept him around a long time, plus a change of clothes and your food. And the Levite agreed to this, and the young man became like one of Micah's sons, which is all this whole. I'm gonna ask you why. Micah is a really confused person to me. It says, so Micah installed the Levite as his personal priest, and he lived in Micah's house. I know the Lord will bless me now, Micah said, because I have a Levite serving as my priest. So he says, stay here with me, and you can be a father and a priest, but he becomes like a son. You know, when I read that, I'm like, golly, I feel like I'm listening to a country song.
Or a Dr. Phil episode.
Why do you need a personal priest anyway?
Yeah, well,
I mean, was it common?
no, I don't think so. I think the one thing I'll give Mike is I think he is chasing after something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's looking for something. And whatever he may only have remnants. The Levites are the priests. Let me bring him here and let him be my priest. He's seeking for something, whether it's misguided or not.
Yeah, I agree. Verse 13, he says, I know the Lord will bless me now. It appears that he's been searching for the Lord's blessing on his life. And perhaps, as strange as it may seem, when he saw the mama's 1100 shekels of silver over here, he's like, oh, there's the Lord's blessing. He's provided this. And as strange or far-fetched as that sounds, we sometimes make strange justifications of bad choices and decisions we make in the pursuit of this is God's deliverance or blessing. This illicit relationship. God has sent this person because He's chosen to bless me. That's crazy. But we get that far fetched. But He is searching for something, and he wants some connection with God. He wants the blessing, some favor of God. And so this is the next thing in line that comes along. I'm going to have my own personal priest live here. I'm paying his salary, and so everything's going to be good.
Yeah, so we're living in a time, so there's a couple of things I would say. I think there's lots of ignorance, okay, spiritual ignorance. I think people have lots of questions. Even people who've maybe even been raised in the church have lots of questions. So what should our response be to the people who are spiritually ignorant, who do have questions? What should be the church's approach to people who are seeking, because he's clearly seeking. I think that's a struggle for us, because sometimes people who are seeking gouge us or rub us the wrong way, or we feel like they're threatening us because they're saying, I don't understand why you do such a thing. When people are genuinely seeking, but they're not doing it the way that we think they ought to, how should we respond to them?
There needs to be a lot of patience, a lot of grace. There's a huge difference between somebody who is searching and seeking and looking and doesn't understand versus somebody who knows different and they just choose not to, or rebel, even worse. And so there's a huge difference. And I would agree that I've been guilty of this. When people don't, quote, measure up or meet the standard that you think they should, there tends to be a little impatience or a little judgmentalism. But in a situation like this, we need to recognize that, and then we need to try to resource and equip those people and provide them with the knowledge and information that they are looking for, so that we can help point them in the right direction.
Yeah. And I think, as hard as it can be, it's important for us to remember how God has treated us, how patient He is with us, as many times as we turn away, and the questions that we have that maybe we shouldn't. And we have to remember what we've received and be willing to give that back to other people. Because ultimately, as a Christian, you should want for everybody to experience that, whether it's an inconvenience to you, to help that person get there or not.
All right, good. All right, well, let's close in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for the passages that jump off the page at us that we may not have paid a lot of attention to prior to. Thank you for how they speak into our lives. And challenge us. May we be aware that there are people who are seeking after you but don't know exactly how to get there and what to do. May we have the patience to be able to answer their questions and to guide them. May we put in place some spiritual practices that can be modeled for everyone, that people, no matter where they are and what they're doing, can practice them on a regular basis and draw closer to you and worship you and know more about you. May we be intentional about those things, and may we change the world around us by doing that, in Jesus' name.